and welcome to Classic Film, Montgomery, Clift, and Other Great Actors podcasts. Today we'll be talking about Mae West. Mae West, How Sex Helped Empower Women. Before Marilyn, before Jean Harlow, we have Mae West, the true originator of the blonde bombshell persona. A writer, producer, actor, singer, and dancer, Mae West was first and foremost unabashedly herself. A pioneer well ahead of her time, Mae showcased herself as a strong, independent woman whom the script revolved around. She stormed into Hollywood on her own terms, making it possible for next-generation actresses to do the same. Indeed, though considered a sex symbol, Mae did a great deal for women. Childhood. Mae was born Mary Jane West on August 17, 1893, in Brooklyn, New York. Her mother, Tilly, was a fashion model, and her father was a boxer, along with various other jobs. She was the second of 4 children. However, her eldest sister died at 3 months old. The death of Katie, the eldest, may have caused Tilly to be over-attentive to Mae, who was undeniably a very spoiled child. Tilly also tended to favor Mae over the other children. Mae had a very strong connection with her mother, but seemed to have almost none at all with her father, whom she actually seemed to dislike. The only explanation given was that he smoked cigars. Admittedly, cigars are quite obnoxious to be around, but it hardly seems a legitimate reason to dislike your own father. Another theory is that she didn't care for the way he treated her mother. Not that he was abusive in any way, but even young Mae didn't care for the idea of a woman's sole job as that of a homemaker. Stage and vaudeville. Tilly got Mae involved in the stage and theater, small places such as churches to begin. She might have been considered a stage mother type, but Mae was a little diva from the start and took right to the stage. Supposedly, around 14, she officially began on the vaudeville circuit. She also attended Ned Wayburn's Institute of Dance, which boasted such alumni as Fred Astaire and Groucho Marx. Ned Wayburn would be instrumental in getting Mae started on Broadway by casting her in his revue entitled A la Broadway. Sadly, the show did not last long, but it did get her other jobs on Broadway, including Vera Violetta, which featured Al Jolson. Among her travels with various theater companies, she would often go to black jazz clubs to listen to the music and watch the dancing. This later proved to be influential in her musical style and her own dance. She had a breakout role in a revue called Sometime, mainly because of a dance she performed called the shimmy. This was something she had appropriated from the black jazz dancers, and it became a huge dance trend. During her time in vaudeville, she met another performer named Frank Wallace, whom she was persuaded to marry in 1911. Almost immediately, she realized the mistake, as he expected her to be a housewife. She therefore simply went off with another revue and pretty much washed her hands of him, basically keeping the marriage a secret. This marriage did eventually come to the attention of the press, and she was forced to get a divorce in 1943. Mae's plays on Broadway. I imagine Mae was less than enthralled with the roles for women on the stage and on screen in the mid-1920s. Let's bear in mind that Mae is a headstrong person used to getting what she wanted. She began to write her own plays as starring vehicles for herself. The first such play she decided to entitle Sex. As you may assume, this was not a nice little PG-rated play, but a play that revolved around the lead character, played by Mae, who was a prostitute, which was bad in and of itself, but, worse yet, refused to allow the character to reform or show remorse. Written, directed, and produced by Mae, written under her pseudonym Jane Mast, she took the play on a little tour of New England before opening in New York in April of 1926. Critics were horrified, offended, and slammed the play in every possible media outlet. Instead of causing the show to close, it had the opposite effect of creating a curiosity to see what was so outrageous. This resulted in huge box office sales. Pleased with the success of Sex, she turned to an even more controversial topic in her next play, The Drag. This was about homosexual men. There was a definite gay underbelly in vaudeville and Broadway at the time, but it was not acknowledged to the public. In fact, it was very taboo in society at that time. Mae was actually a supporter of gay rights, though more than likely the play was just as much to create publicity through controversial subjects as it was to help gay men in society. The play was run in Connecticut, and the critics and censors went berserk, creating a furor that sent New York authorities to raid Sex, which was still performing on Broadway. Mae was actually convicted and jailed for a period of time, 7 days it is said, and forced to pull both the drag and Sex off the circuit. However, Mae's stint in jail was highly publicized, and again, she was heralded by the public. Mae went on to write several other plays such as The Wicked Age, Pleasure Man, and The Constant Sinner. Some of these plays did well with the public, but critics had wisely realized they were contributing to Mae's popularity and began to ignore Mae's plays, especially The Wicked Age, which then caused it to die at the box office. Mae began to be concerned that her plays were attracting mostly males. She wanted to attract the female dynamic as well. She took to writing a play entitled Diamond Lil, in which she gave her character a glamorous but sexy corseted dress and based her story in the 1890s. She also began to inject humor into the lines, creating funny one-liner type double entendres to pacify the moral code people. Thus, she created her Mae West persona that would remain with her for the rest of her career. This change in style not only brought out the women, but also began to garnish better reviews from critics. Diamond Lil was a huge hit and really catapulted Mae West to fame. Paramount Pictures. Mae had an old friend that had become popular in Hollywood and the motion picture industry. His name was George Raft. George was slated to do a film entitled Night After Night, 1932, and thought the small role of Maudie might be ideal for Mae West. However, officials at Paramount and other studios had already been interested in Mae. Hollywood could see the success she was having in New York and realized that success could help with their struggling studios. Paramount specifically, which was close to bankruptcy. Therefore, Mae was cast in Night After Night as Maudie. Now, Mae had never done any movie acting, and she was playing a rather small role. Though well known in New York and the East Coast, she was perhaps not that known in other parts of the country. Nevertheless, Night After Night, though a cute premise with George Raft as a gangster who hires a finishing teacher to teach him how to behave in proper society, kind of plods along until we get introduced to Mae West. She's clearly the best part of the film, and the only one who seems to have any kind of life in her character. George Raft would go on to say, quote, "Mae stole everything except the cameras," end quote, which is a reference to her stealing the picture away from the main stars. She Done Him Wrong, 1933. Though many studios were trying to get the rights to Mae's Diamond Lil, censors in the movie picture industry were determined to prevent it. Paramount was able to get around this by creating a film based on Diamond Lil, but calling it She Done Him Wrong. Mae was credited with the writing, but not the screenplay or any other aspect of the film other than starring in it. Despite this, Mae was basically in charge of everything from casting to approving the screenplay to costumes. Mae had seen a handsome young man in the Paramount lot prior to filming and asked who he was. She was told he was a young actor named Cary Grant. Mae insisted on him for the lead despite his limited film experience. This would prove a huge boost in Cary Grant's career. Mae would also introduce a different kind of female film character. Most films portrayed women as secondary to the male leading character, and they were often being wooed and pursued by the male to wind up happily married. Mae introduced a character who used and discarded men, a woman who was confident in herself and comfortable with her sexuality. In fact, it was Mae West playing Mae West, but it helped empower women in an era where women were expected to marry and raise families. Mae West also almost single-handedly saved Paramount Pictures. She Done Him Wrong was a huge box office hit, grossing over $2 million, today approximately $140 million. It was also nominated for an Academy Award for Best Picture, the only Mae West movie to ever be nominated for an Oscar. I'm No Angel, 1933. After the success of She Done Him Wrong, Paramount was quick to release I'm No Angel, which gave all writing credits to Mae, including screenplay. She again was involved with all aspects of production and again recruited Cary Grant to play a lead role in the film. Here we see the beginnings of the suave, charming, confident Cary Grant persona. This film was an even bigger success than She Done Him Wrong, and an especially big success with women. There were actually women-only screenings of this film. Mae would also cast several black actresses in her films. Unfortunately, they were still given stereotypical maid-type roles, but Mae's character tended to treat them as friends and confidants rather than servants. She also gave them credit in the film, which was somewhat rare at the time. Production Code 1934. Everyone speaks of the Production Code as if it was implemented in 1934. It was actually implemented in 1930, however, the men charged with enforcing the code were rather lackadaisical about their job. It was also difficult for one man to go through the huge amount of scripts that were going into production. Another problem was that the Hayes office could only make suggestions, not order the studios to change material. Therefore, it was completely ineffective and generally a joke. Fast forward to 1934, when several things began to change. In fact, Mae West's movies may have been one of the reasons for the changes. The Production Code adopted an amendment which established a Production Code Administration. No film could be released without a certificate of approval from the PCA. In addition, they established two offices, one in New York and one in Hollywood. Lastly, Joseph Breen was appointed head of the newly formed PCA. A devout Catholic, he made it his mission to strictly adhere to the Production Code. This began a new era of nightmares for film producers. It was also a huge problem for Mae. Naturally, she was an easy person to target given her history, so any script submitted by her was going to be most carefully scrutinized. She was, at this time, one of the largest box office draws and the second highest paid person in the United States. I emphasize this to show you that Mae was making more than every man in the motion picture industry, as the only more highly paid person was William Randolph Hearst. Again, we see Mae breaking barriers for women, something still contested to this very day, an equal wage for women. This new Production Code Administration was about to throw a wrench into everything. Mae had to make changes to her next film, Belle of the 90s, 1934, to get it approved. She began to put in really racy lines that even she would find embarrassing, in the hopes that they would allow the merely suggestive lines through. An example of how rigid the PCA was at that time, Belle of the 90s was originally entitled Ain't No Sin, but that was deemed unfit under the Production Code. Mae insisted on having Duke Ellington and his orchestra accompany her on the film musical numbers. Paramount was dead set against it. Mae dug in her spurs and refused to proceed without Duke, and Paramount was forced to give in. We remember that Mae had been heavily influenced by early black jazz musicians, so it seems very natural that she would promote black jazz musicians in her films. The song My Old Flame was introduced in this film. Mae's next couple films did not do well at the box office, and it was clear that the censorship was taking a toll on her material. Paramount was also feeling the pressure from the Hayes office. They wanted Mae to tone it down. Mae stated, quote, "I was the first liberated woman, you know. No guy was going to get the best of me. That's what I wrote all my scripts about," end quote. Mae starred in a movie she adapted from Lawrence Riley's personal appearance, which she cutely entitled Go West, Young Man, 1936. Even with popular pre-code leading man, Warren William, who I really love, and Randolph Scott, this movie falls flat. It's really missing those witty innuendos that made Mae's earlier movies so good, and the ending seems not like Mae West at all. Box office poison. Mae attempted one more film for Paramount in 1937, Every Day's a Holiday, which flopped. A list came out of actors labeled box office poison, and sadly, Mae was on the list. However, also on the list you will find some of the greatest actresses of this time: Greta Garbo, Joan Crawford, Katharine Hepburn, and Marlene Dietrich. Not too shabby company, really. An interesting note is that David O. Selznick offered Mae the role of Belle Watling, the prostitute who is Rhett's go-to girl and confidant in Gone with the Wind, but Mae turned the role down. It's kind of a shame because it would have been interesting to see her try a dramatic role, but I feel like by this time she was stuck in the Mae West persona. My Little Chickadee, 1940. What genius thought of putting Mae and W.C. Fields together? Actually, it may have been W.C. Fields himself. Mae was talked into doing this picture by W.C. and Universal. W.C. kindly left out her part when writing the screenplay to allow her to create her own character and dialogue. However, Mae wasn't especially happy with not having creative control of the entire picture. And indeed, it is an oddly mismatched script. In fact, Mae disliked this film and found it annoying to be the film she was best known for. Also, W.C. was a terrible drunk, and Mae did not drink or smoke, very unusual in 1940, so they had difficulty on the production. Nevertheless, it's a beautiful thing to see these two great vaudevillian comedians in their self-created personas. Even better, at the very end, they swap catchphrases impersonating each other. It's just gold. The only better thing would have been if we could have added in the Marx Brothers. Happily, the general public also liked Mae and W.C. together, and the film was a box office hit. However, Mae was tired of Hollywood and its constraints and longed to get back to the stage. Friend Gregory Radoff, co-star from I'm No Angel, called up and begged Mae to help him with a film, and Mae reluctantly agreed. The film was The Heat Is On, 1943. Mae didn't have any say in her dialogue, and the film did not do well. Viva Las Vegas. What does Mae West do when she can no longer perform her dialogue and her persona in Hollywood? Well, she goes to the one place where sex sells and anything goes, Las Vegas. Could she have chosen any better? Mae created a stage show with scantily clad bodybuilders, perhaps a precursor to the Chippendales. This show was popular with both women and men. In fact, Jane Mansfield married one of Mae's bodybuilders, Mickey Hargitay. Also, Mae began dating one of them, Paul Novak, formerly known as Chester Rybinski. Mae was often attracted to muscle men and boxers. Mae did well with her show in Las Vegas. Final films. Myra Breckinridge, 1970. Although she had been offered roles throughout the years, including Norma Desmond in Sunset Boulevard, Mae turned everything down until Gore Vidal's Myra Breckinridge. It was a campy sex change comedy, so that may have been what drew Mae to the film. Sadly, many of her scenes were cut and her part diminished. Sexette, 1978. This film was adapted from a 1959 script by Mae West. However, she was quite old at the time of the film, 84, and her eyesight was very poor. She also had to have her lines read to her through an earpiece. She still gives us vintage Mae West, though, with perhaps less snappy timing. It does seem obvious she's listening before speaking. Though some may find an 84-year-old woman shaking her hips and doling out the sexual innuendo rather disturbing, I say it's Mae West being Mae West and shattering stigmas about older people. The amount of famous people with cameos in this movie prove what Mae West was to film, that these folks would all come together to see her off for her last film. Perhaps the most touching of all is George Raft, co-star of her very first film ever, saying goodbye to her in her last film ever. Farewell to a legend. Paul Novak remained with Mae for the rest of her life. He was instrumental in caring for her, and indeed was quoted as saying, quote, "I believe I was put on this earth to take care of Mae West," end quote. In August of 1980, Mae suffered a stroke which left her unable to talk. She was hospitalized for a time, but eventually Paul took her back home and hired nurses to help him care for her. She passed away on November 22, 1980, age 87. A legend lost. If you'd like to see some video clips from a couple of Mae's films, you can see them on my blog at Classic Film, Montgomery, Clift, and Other Great Actors. This is the end of Mae West, How Sex Helped Empower Women. Please follow Classic Film, Montgomery, Clift, and Other Great Actors podcasts to get new podcasts, and check out some of our previous podcasts available on Amazon Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and iHeartRadio Podcasts, as well as Spotify.